The smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon cookies, and pine filled the house long before I stepped through the front door. Christmas had always looked perfect from the outside. White lights wrapped around the porch, a giant wreath hung on the entrance, and cheerful music drifted through the windows. Anyone driving past would think this was the happiest family in the neighborhood. I knew better. Bruno, my golden retriever, trotted beside me with a bright red bow tied around his neck. His tail wagged so hard it nearly knocked over the ceramic snowman by the front steps. "Easy, buddy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. The moment I opened the door, every conversation inside seemed to pause for exactly 1 second before continuing. "There he is," my sister Emily announced. The mysterious traveler finally showed up. Bruno ignored everyone and sprinted straight toward the Christmas tree, where he immediately found a plate of unattended cookies. "Bruno!" I called. Too late. Half the cookies disappeared before anyone could react. My father laughed. "At least someone appreciates Linda's baking." Mom folded her arms. "The dog has better manners than his owner." I smiled politely. "Merry Christmas to you too, Mom." She kissed my cheek before stepping back to inspect me like airport security. "No ring?" "Nope." "No girlfriend?" "Nope." "No children?" "I don't think Bruno counts." Bruno barked proudly as if confirming his promotion to honorary son. Everyone laughed except my mother. I was serious. "I know. You'll understand someday. A house isn't a home without a family." I glanced down at Bruno. "I've got family. The dog doesn't count." Bruno looked offended enough to steal another cookie. Emily burst into laughter. "He's honestly the smartest one here." Mom rolled her eyes. "You know what worries me? You're almost 40. 37. Close enough. And you're still wandering around the world chasing whatever it is you do." "I work. On a laptop." "Yes. Which means nobody really knows if you actually work." Dad quietly sipped his coffee, wisely refusing to enter the battlefield. Emily leaned over. "So, seriously, what do you even do these days?" "A little investing." "What kind?" "The profitable kind." She laughed. "Very funny." "I thought so." Mom wasn't amused. "Emily has a husband. I've noticed. 2 beautiful children. They're adorable. A real home. I've visited. And you." She gestured toward Bruno. "Have a dog." Bruno wagged his tail proudly again. I patted his head. "He pays rent." Dad chuckled so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Mom shot him a glare. "This isn't funny." "I think it's a little funny." She ignored me. "I just don't understand why you're determined to grow old alone." "I won't be alone." "Oh? I'll have Bruno." The room exploded with laughter. Even I laughed. Mom didn't. "You joke now, but one day you'll wake up old with nobody beside you." I shrugged. "That's tomorrow Ethan's problem." Emily nearly snorted eggnog through her nose. "You've always been impossible." "I prefer professionally optimistic." Mom sighed dramatically. "You know what your problem is?" "I have several." "You never settled down." "I settled." "No, you escaped." "I traveled." "You ran away from responsibility." "I built a career." "You avoided adulthood." "I paid taxes." "That's adult enough." Dad raised his coffee mug toward me. "I can't argue with that." Mom ignored him again. "Look at your sister." Emily smiled proudly. "We've got soccer practice every weekend." I nodded. "I've seen the photos. My husband remodeled the kitchen. It looks nice. We're thinking about buying a bigger house." "Congratulations." Mom pointed toward Emily like she was presenting Exhibit A in court. "That's success." I smiled. "If she's happy, then absolutely." "And what do you have?" I looked around thoughtfully. "Excellent posture." Emily laughed again. "No, honestly. I sleep 8 hours. Ethan. I've mastered making pancakes." Mom pinched the bridge of her nose. This is exactly why nobody can have a serious conversation with you. I am serious. You deflect everything with jokes. I find life easier that way. She shook her head. I just hate seeing wasted potential. That sentence almost hurt. Almost. 10 years ago it would have. Back then every word from my parents felt like a final exam I could never pass. Graduate college? Not enough. Find a career? Not impressive. Start a business? Too risky. Travel? Irresponsible. Stay single? Embarrassing. Eventually I realized something life-changing. Some people don't actually want you to succeed. They want you to succeed exactly the way they imagine. Anything different looks like failure. That realization had freed me. Bruno nudged my hand, pulling me back to the present. His nose was covered in whipped cream. I had no idea where he'd found it. Mom stared. Wonderful. Now the dog is eating dessert. He has excellent taste. Just then my watch vibrated. A message flashed across the screen. Happy holidays, Mr. Carter. The resort staff has finished preparing everything for your family's arrival. Director Zalek also confirmed tomorrow's interstellar guest reception. Another message followed. Nova says she can't wait to see you again. I smiled for just a second before locking the screen. Emily noticed. Business? Something like that. Mom smirked. Probably another online meeting. You could say that. I still don't understand how staring at a computer pays your bills. It pays them surprisingly well. She laughed. I'm sure it does. Dinner continued. Stories were exchanged. The kids opened early presents. Bruno somehow convinced both children to feed him turkey under the table despite repeated warnings. Dad whispered to me, I think your dog gained 5 pounds. He calls it winter preparation. Dad laughed. It felt good hearing that. Despite everything, I still loved moments like these. Not because they were perfect. Because they reminded me how far I'd come. After dessert, I stood. I actually brought everyone a Christmas gift. Mom looked pleasantly surprised. Really? I reached into my coat and placed elegant cream-colored envelopes on the table. Each envelope had a silver mountain embossed on the front. Emily opened hers first. A luxury mountain resort? Dad raised his eyebrows. This place looks expensive. Mom flipped hers over. Is this one of those vacation timeshare scams? No. So you won the trip? No. Emily studied the invitation. It says we've been invited for an exclusive Christmas stay beginning tomorrow. Dad smiled. That's generous. Mom frowned. How much did this cost you? Don't worry about it. Oh, I'm worrying. You don't need to. She looked suspiciously at the elegant paper. I've never even heard of this resort. You will. Emily leaned closer. The photos are incredible. Snow-covered mountains. Glass lodges. Infinity pools overlooking frozen valleys. Even Bruno tilted his head as everyone admired the pictures. Dad smiled. I haven't had a vacation in years. Mom finally sighed. Well, I suppose one night wouldn't hurt. I smiled. I think you'll enjoy it. She folded the invitation and slipped it into her purse. I just hope this place allows dogs. Before I could answer, Bruno barked happily. I scratched behind his ears and couldn't help smiling. Oh, I said quietly. They definitely allow him. No one noticed the tiny detail printed beneath the resort's golden logo. Privately owned and operated by Carter Interstellar Hospitality Group. They simply assumed I had booked a holiday getaway. None of them realized that by this time tomorrow, they wouldn't be checking into the resort. They would be stepping into my world. The following morning, everyone piled into the luxury shuttle that had arrived exactly on time. It wasn't an ordinary bus. Its sleek silver exterior reflected the snow-covered trees, and the windows stretched from floor to ceiling, giving us an uninterrupted view of the mountains. Soft instrumental music played through hidden speakers while heated seats kept everyone warm. Emily looked around in amazement. I thought this was supposed to be a small mountain lodge. Dad whistled. If this is the shuttle, I'd hate to see the hotel. Mom crossed her arms. I still think Ethan spent way too much money on this. I smiled without looking up from my coffee. You'll survive. Bruno immediately claimed the largest seat in the vehicle, stretching out like he owned the place. Every few minutes he would stick his nose against the glass, leaving a perfect trail of foggy paw-shaped smudges behind. Emily laughed. I swear that dog has more confidence than most people. He learned from me. You wish. After nearly an hour climbing through snow-covered mountain roads, the forest suddenly opened, revealing a breathtaking valley. Everyone fell silent. An enormous resort stood between towering white peaks. Elegant glass buildings blended naturally into the mountainside while waterfalls flowed beneath crystal bridges despite the freezing weather. Floating lanterns drifted peacefully above frozen lakes, their gentle blue glow reflecting off the snow. Beyond the main entrance, people from dozens of worlds strolled together. Some looked almost human. Others had shimmering blue skin, silver eyes, or colorful markings that glowed softly in the winter sunlight. Families laughed together while children, human and alien alike, played in the snow. Emily blinked twice. I've never seen anything like this. Dad stared through the window. Are those aliens? They're tourists, I answered casually. Mom looked from one side of the valley to the other. This place must cost a fortune. The shuttle stopped beneath a massive wooden arch decorated with Christmas lights and glowing crystal ornaments. A polished stone sign stood beside the entrance. Welcome to Starfall Mountain Resort, where every world feels like home. Before anyone could step off the shuttle, nearly a dozen staff members hurried toward us. Mom whispered, Well, someone important must be arriving. She wasn't wrong. The moment I stepped onto the snow, the resort's general manager rushed forward with a huge smile. Mr. Carter! Merry Christmas! He shook my hand enthusiastically. We've been looking forward to your visit. It's good to see you again, Marcus. The staff finished preparing everything exactly as requested. Perfect. He noticed Bruno and immediately knelt down. And hello to our favorite guest. Bruno barked once before accepting several gourmet dog treats from the manager's pocket. Dad raised an eyebrow. They know your dog? Marcus laughed. Everyone here knows Bruno. Mom smiled proudly. See? He's probably here every year. Marcus looked confused. Of course he is. Then he added the sentence that made everyone freeze. This resort wouldn't exist without Mr. Carter. Silence. Emily looked at me. What did he just say? Marcus continued smiling. When Mr. Carter purchased this mountain 15 years ago, most people believed building an interstellar vacation destination here was impossible. Mom laughed nervously. I think you've mistaken my son for someone else. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Mistaken him? He glanced at me. Sir, should I explain? I nodded. If you want. Marcus turned back toward my family. Mr. Ethan Carter is the founder and owner of Carter Interstellar Hospitality Group. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Emily slowly looked up at the enormous resort. You mean? Marcus smiled. Yes. She looked at me again. You own this? I do. Mom folded her arms. Very funny. Marcus frowned. I'm not joking. She pointed toward the main building. This entire place? Every room. The restaurants? Yes. The spa? Yes. The ski lifts? Yes. The lake? Mostly. Emily stared. You can own a lake? Apparently. Dad suddenly burst into laughter. I knew you were hiding something. I wasn't hiding. You never told us. You never asked? Mom shook her head. This doesn't make any sense. Marcus politely pulled out a digital tablet. Perhaps this will help. He displayed the resort's official ownership records. At the top appeared my photograph. Beneath it was my name. Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Mom leaned closer. Her eyes widened. She looked at me. Then back at the screen. Then at me again. No. I shrugged. I tried telling you my laptop paid the bills. Emily covered her mouth. Oh my gosh! Dad looked around the valley with completely different eyes now. I've been making jokes about your remote job. I know. You let me. It was entertaining. Marcus smiled. If you'll follow me, your private residence has already been prepared. Mom interrupted. Private residence? Mr. Carter's penthouse overlooking the northern cliffs. I thought we booked hotel rooms. Marcus looked puzzled. You'll be staying with the owner. Bruno barked proudly as if to say, finally, someone understands. Before we started walking, another voice echoed across the snowy courtyard. Ethan! I turned. A graceful woman hurried toward us through the falling snow. She was slightly taller than most humans, with shimmering silver hair flowing past her shoulders. Tiny glowing patterns decorated her light blue skin, sparkling like stars beneath the winter sun. Her elegant white coat matched the surrounding snow, making her appear almost magical. Without hesitation, she wrapped me in a warm hug. I've missed you. I've missed you too. She smiled brightly. You disappeared for nearly 3 weeks. My family tends to require supervision. I noticed. She laughed before finally looking toward everyone else. And these must be the famous relatives I've heard so much about. Mom immediately assumed what everyone else did. You work for Ethan? The woman burst into laughter. No. So, you're his assistant? She laughed even harder. I'm afraid not. Emily smiled awkwardly. Manager? No. She stepped beside me and gently slipped her arm through mine. My name is Nova. She looked directly at my mother. I'm actually hoping he'll finally agree to let me take him on a proper dinner date. Complete silence. Mom stared. Emily stared. Dad slowly smiled. Oh. Nova tilted her head. Was that supposed to be a secret? I rubbed the back of my neck. I was waiting for the right moment. She laughed. I've waited 8 months. Mom finally managed to speak. You're dating an alien? Nova smiled warmly. Hopefully soon. I've been very patient. Before anyone could process that sentence, Bruno suddenly grabbed Nova's long scarf and sprinted across the courtyard. Oh no! Nova laughed. Bruno! The dog raced between laughing tourists, under decorative arches, and straight through a group of cheerful alien children who immediately joined the chase, believing it was some kind of Christmas game. Within seconds, half the courtyard was laughing while Bruno proudly paraded around with the scarf fluttering behind him like a championship flag. Nova doubled over laughing. I think he likes me. He does. How can you tell? He only steals from people he considers family. She smiled at Bruno with genuine affection. I'll consider that an honor. As the laughter slowly settled, Marcus gestured toward an elegant glass elevator built into the mountainside. If everyone is ready, he said, smiling knowingly, it's time to show you where Mr. Carter actually lives. None of my family said another word. For the first time in years, they weren't looking at me like the son who never settled down. They were looking at me like someone they had never truly known. The glass elevator climbed silently along the mountainside, revealing more of the valley with every passing second. Snowflakes drifted outside like tiny glowing stars while the entire resort stretched beneath us. Ski trails wound through the mountains, colorful lights decorated every rooftop, and distant laughter echoed from outdoor cafes where humans and aliens celebrated Christmas together. Nobody spoke. Dad occasionally looked at me, then back out the window, as though checking whether this was somehow still a dream. Emily finally broke the silence. So, how many rooms are in this place? Just over 400. She nearly choked. 400? Depends if we're counting the floating villas. Mom stared. Floating, what? You'll see those tomorrow. The elevator doors opened onto the highest level of the mountain. A pair of carved wooden doors slid apart automatically. Beyond them stretched a breathtaking penthouse built almost entirely of glass and polished stone. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked miles of snowy forests and frozen lakes. A massive fireplace crackled in the center of the room while warm golden lights reflected off elegant artwork collected from dozens of different worlds. Bruno sprinted inside like a tour guide returning home after a long vacation. He leaped onto an enormous couch, rolled onto his back, and stretched out dramatically. Dad laughed. I think he remembers the place. He practically lives on that couch. Mom slowly walked through the living room. This is your home? Most of the year. Emily wandered toward a wall filled with framed photographs. At first she smiled. Then her expression slowly changed. There were pictures of me standing beside engineers, explorers, scientists, and business partners from Earth and beyond. One photo showed me cutting the ribbon at the opening of another resort. Another showed volunteers delivering supplies after a natural disaster. There were awards from environmental organizations, tourism councils, and humanitarian groups. Emily picked up one crystal trophy. Interstellar Entrepreneur of the Year? She looked at me. You never mentioned this. I didn't think it would come up during Thanksgiving. Dad examined another award. Outstanding Human Innovation. He laughed quietly. I honestly thought you just answered emails all day. I do answer emails. Apparently very expensive emails. Nova walked over carrying a tray of steaming drinks. I've told him for years he should brag a little more. I tried once. She smiled. What happened? My mother asked if I was finally dating anyone. Even Dad couldn't hold back his laughter. Mom looked embarrassed but kept browsing the room. She stopped in front of an enormous wall-sized map. Colored lights marked dozens of locations across Earth and nearby colonies. What is this? Our company properties. She looked confused. All these lights? Each one is a hotel, resort, research lodge, or expedition center. Emily counted for several seconds before giving up. How many are there? 32. Dad slowly sat down in the nearest chair. I suddenly understand why your phone never stops ringing. Nova handed everyone warm drinks before sitting beside me. Emily watched us carefully. So, how did you two meet? Nova smiled. He accidentally spilled coffee on me. I corrected her. It wasn't coffee. It was hot chocolate. It was gravity. She laughed. He walked into the conference room carrying 3 cups and somehow dropped all of them onto my presentation. Emily covered her mouth to hide a smile. You met because he made a mess? Nova nodded. The worst first impression in recorded history. I apologized. For 15 straight minutes. I felt terrible. He offered to buy me dinner. And? I said no. Dad grinned. Ouch. Nova continued. Then he spent the rest of the conference helping everyone else solve problems instead of trying to impress investors. She looked at me with genuine admiration. That's when I realized he was different. Mom quietly listened. Nova continued speaking. In my culture, many people admire humans. Emily looked surprised. Really? Oh yes. Why? Nova smiled. Because humans are wonderfully stubborn. Dad laughed. I can't argue with that. She continued. Most civilizations avoid failure. She pointed toward me. He practically collects it. I nodded. She's not wrong. Nova laughed. He once told me every mistake was simply expensive education. Dad smiled proudly. That sounds exactly like something your grandfather used to say. For a moment, the room became quiet. I walked toward the fireplace. You know, when I left home, I didn't have any of this. Nobody interrupted. I had an old truck. I smiled. Bruno. The dog immediately barked from the couch. And exactly $400. Emily frowned. I thought your first business failed. It did. The second? Also failed. The third? Worse. Dad raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Oh yes. I lost almost everything. Nova laughed. Twice. 3 times. She corrected herself. Right. 3. Mom slowly turned toward me. But we thought you were just traveling. I was. How did you suddenly become successful? It wasn't sudden. I looked out at the mountains. It took 15 years. The room remained completely silent. I worked jobs nobody wanted. I slept in airports. I shared apartments so tiny Bruno had to sleep under my desk. Bruno barked proudly again. I pitched ideas hundreds of times. Most people rejected them. Nova smiled. I rejected him too. You certainly did. Twice. Emily laughed. You really had a rough start. The rough start lasted about 8 years. Dad shook his head. I never knew. You never asked? Nobody could argue with that. Mom finally spoke, her voice much quieter than before. We just assumed. I know. She looked down. We assumed you never figured life out. I smiled gently. I did. Just not the version everyone expected. Emily sat beside the window. You know, I always thought you envied my life. I looked surprised. Why would I? Mom kept saying I was the example. I laughed softly. I've always wanted you to be happy. She looked away. My marriage isn't perfect. Nobody said anything. She sighed. We argue constantly. The mortgage is exhausting. The kids are wonderful. She smiled. But sometimes I forget what sleeping feels like. Dad laughed. I remember those years. Emily smiled. I used to look at your travel photos and think you were the lucky one. That caught me completely off guard. You did? She nodded. I was jealous. You looked free. Mom slowly sat down for the first time since entering the penthouse. She looked around at everything again. The awards. The photographs. The company map. The view stretching endlessly beyond the windows. Finally, she whispered the question that had been growing heavier every minute. You really built all of this? Her voice cracked slightly. Without us? I looked at my mother for several long seconds before answering. Yes. The room remained completely still. But not because I wanted to. I walked over to the giant windows overlooking the snow-covered valley. I spent years hoping one day I'd make you proud. No one interrupted. Every promotion. Every business. Every award. I kept thinking, maybe this will finally be enough. I smiled to myself. It never was. Mom lowered her eyes. I didn't realize. I know. I stopped chasing approval. I turned back toward everyone. And that's when everything changed. Nova quietly slipped her hand into mine. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Dad let out a slow breath. I owe you an apology. I smiled. You don't owe me anything. I do. He shook his head. I kept believing you were wasting your life. I know. I never once asked what you were actually building. You were busy. No. His voice became heavier. I just assumed I already knew. For the first time all weekend, my mother looked genuinely emotional. I thought I was helping. I know. I kept pushing you because I wanted you to have a family. I have one. She looked confused. I smiled toward Nova. She smiled back. Then I pointed toward Bruno, who had somehow climbed onto an oversized chair and was snoring loudly with his tongue hanging out. And him. Right on cue, Bruno let out an enormous snore that echoed through the room. Everyone burst into laughter. Even Mom laughed through the tears forming in her eyes. I suppose he's impossible to ignore. Exactly. Nova grinned. In fairness, Bruno believes this resort exists entirely for him. It practically does. As if understanding the conversation, Bruno suddenly woke up, stretched dramatically, and trotted toward the kitchen. A loud metallic crash echoed through the penthouse. Nova sighed dramatically. He found the automatic snack dispenser. A robotic serving cart rolled frantically across the kitchen while Bruno happily chased it in circles. The tiny machine repeatedly announced in a calm electronic voice. Unauthorized canine detected. Please remain calm. Snacks are not included in your reservation. Bruno barked triumphantly. The robot panicked, retreating. It rolled away at maximum speed while Bruno chased after it like he just discovered the greatest game in the galaxy. Emily laughed so hard she had to hold on to the counter. I have never seen a robot run away from a dog. Nova wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. The first time they met, the robot surrendered an entire tray of bacon. I remember. It still hasn't recovered emotionally. The cheerful moment broke the remaining tension inside the room. A few minutes later, Marcus appeared at the doorway. Dinner is ready, sir. We followed him downstairs into the grand holiday dining hall. The enormous room sparkled with thousands of lights suspended beneath a glass ceiling where snowflakes drifted peacefully overhead. Long tables displayed dishes from Earth and dozens of neighboring worlds. Human chefs worked side by side with alien cooks, laughing as they prepared holiday meals together. Dad looked around in amazement. This is incredible. Emily pointed toward a glowing blue dessert. What is that? Nova smiled. It tastes like vanilla. And blueberries. And somehow fireworks. Emily blinked. I'm both excited and terrified. The evening quickly turned into the funniest Christmas dinner any of us had ever experienced. Dad accidentally used a pair of decorative cooking tongs instead of serving utensils. Emily mistook glowing alien butter for scented soap. One curious alien child asked Bruno if all Earth wolves wore Christmas bows. Bruno proudly accepted the compliment. Then came dessert. An automated dessert robot carefully rolled out an enormous floating Christmas cake covered in glowing sugar crystals. Everything looked perfect. Until Bruno noticed it. His ears stood straight up. Oh no! I whispered. Too late. Bruno sprinted toward the cake. The dessert robot panicked. Warning! Fast canine approaching. It attempted to avoid him. Instead, it rolled directly toward a decorative eye sculpture. Guests gasped. The robot swerved. The sculpture began tipping toward a table filled with children. Without thinking, Bruno jumped forward and slammed into the robot. The collision knocked both safely away from the sculpture. The giant block of ice barely missed everyone before settling harmlessly against a support column. Silence. Then applause erupted across the dining hall. One elderly alien laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. The Earth Guardian has saved Christmas dessert. Another guest proudly presented Bruno with a huge holiday medal shaped like a golden bone. Bruno accepted it with complete confidence, as though heroic awards were simply part of his daily routine. Dad shook his head. I can't believe the dog is ending this vacation with military honors. I told you he pays rent. Everyone laughed again. Later that evening we stepped outside onto a balcony overlooking the entire valley. Snow drifted gently through the night while fireworks painted brilliant colors across the sky. Nova stood beside me. So? About that dinner invitation. I smiled. I believe I owe you one. You've owed me one for 8 months. I've been busy. She pretended to think. I suppose owning 32 properties is an acceptable excuse. I appreciate your understanding. She laughed softly. Tomorrow night? It's a date. She slipped her arm around mine. I was beginning to think you'd never ask. Behind us, Mom quietly walked onto the balcony. For a moment none of us spoke. Finally she smiled. I'm happy. I looked at her. For you. She took a deep breath. I spent years believing happiness looked only one way. She glanced toward Nova. I was wrong. I nodded. We all learn. She hesitated. I know I can't undo everything I said. No. But I'd like to do better. I'd like that too. She smiled weakly. Thank you. Dad and Emily joined us a few moments later. Emily wrapped an arm around my shoulder. You know. What? I think you're still the weirdest member of this family. I've worked hard to earn that title. But, she looked around the glowing valley. You're also the smartest. I'll take it. I reached into my coat and handed each of them a small envelope. Dad looked puzzled. Another surprise? Open them. Inside each envelope was a polished metal membership card engraved with the resort's Silver Mountain emblem. Mom looked confused. What are these? Lifetime family memberships. Emily stared. You mean we can come here whenever we want? As often as you'd like. Dad looked at me in disbelief. After everything, you're still giving us this? I smiled. I could spend my life trying to win arguments. I looked around at the joyful resort below, where humans and aliens celebrated together beneath the Christmas lights. Or I could spend it building places where people actually enjoyed being together. For a long moment nobody spoke. The only sounds were laughter drifting through the snowy valley and Bruno happily playing with a group of alien children, proudly wearing his oversized golden medal. Watching him race through the snow, I couldn't help smiling. Years ago my mother believed I would end up alone with nothing but a dog. She had been half right. I still had the dog. What she never imagined was that the dog would help lead me to a life filled with purpose, friendships across worlds, a woman who loved me for exactly who I was, and a home where everyone, human or alien, was welcome. That Christmas, my family arrived expecting to feel sorry for the son who never settled down. Instead, they discovered that I hadn't refused to build a life. I'd simply built one far bigger than any of us had ever imagined.